So what is 5G? 5G is the 5th generation wireless. It's actually an engineering standard that is being purported to make your cell phone and all kinds of communications between your phone and all of these wireless devices, as well as machine to machine, to be faster than ever before. However, in order to build out that network, there need to be hundreds of thousands, actually millions worldwide, new cell tower installations, which are being called small cells by industry. And these are to be literally in our front yards, in front of homes. It's a large build out. There's a lot of money being put forward by our government. The assumption is being put forward that 5G is safe and that the new frequencies which will be used in 5G, and I'm going to talk about that, are safe, and that having all of these cell towers in front of our homes, densification in cities, is safe. And that all rests on the assumption, which I know I had before I got into this, which is that, of course, they pre-market tested safety your cell phones and wireless devices, when actually that's not the case. There was not adequate pre-market safety testing done on the impact to children from wireless radiation and cell phones.
Is a cell tower going up in your neighborhood? If it's not now, it may soon. Wireless carriers are installing millions of them across the country to enable the new, faster 5G cell phone technology. But tonight, Julie Watts asked the question you're not supposed to ask. Are there legitimate health concerns?
It's keeping John Heestand up at night. This new pole outside his bedroom window where Verizon will soon install a next-generation cell tower, just feet from a school.
This would be a big tower pushing out radiation outside of our bedroom window, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for many years.
It's called a small cell or distributed antenna system, similar to this one in San Francisco. The industry says they're safe. Many in Piedmont aren't convinced.
Our daughter is a cancer survivor.
13-year-old Sophia has been one of many petitioning the city council to deny this cell tower and others.
I'm also a brain cancer survivor, and I am against the cell towers.
I mostly talked about my cancer and how it affected me.
But according to federal law, the city simply can't consider health concerns. It's outlined in this small section of the Telecommunications Act, based on science from 1996.
To turn your phone on or off.
Back when this was the height of technology. But if cities do consider health, the cell companies can sue. So with few legal arguments to deny a cell tower, they're popping up outside bedroom windows and school campuses, despite objections from across the country.
So I wanted to start out with, I'm actually going to do a clip of Dr. Davis talking about phones and impacts from cell phone radiation to the brain and to sperm, and then talk about the hundreds of scientists who are now calling to halt 5G. I should mention, so this is a clip from a TEDx talk that Dr. Davis gave, where she talks about the sperm and the brain and as being two areas that are impacted by microwave radiation, because cell phones emit microwave radiation. And she's going to talk about research on how on impacts to brain that include damaged brain cells, as well as changes in brain function.
Toxic agent can get into the body, where it can be distributed, and all of the agents on the screen behind me, solvents, ionizing radiation, metals, and pesticides, are tracked into fat. But guess what? Microwave radiation enhances the absorption of any toxic material in your body. That is why it's so important to understand that you want to keep these devices off your body and especially away from your children, because the fat-loving brain and the fat-happy sperm both are storage sites for toxic agents. Cell phone radiation, microwave radiation can damage brain cells. This is work published by my colleagues in Turkey and we have done this work. You can see the increased white spaces in here means more damage from electromagnetic field exposures that were modeled by a computer to mimic cell phone radiation. Now, the good news part of this is you get less damage if there's melatonin in the system. Melatonin is what you make when you sleep in the dark at night. It's why nobody should try to go to sleep just after checking into their device, or for example, falling asleep with watching a movie on your body. That's interfering with your ability to make melatonin, and melatonin is what you need to repair damage throughout the body. Both melatonin and omega-3 fatty acids on the bottom two cells behind me give you less damage than you will get from electromagnetic fields alone, but still you get the damage into the brain, and be very much aware of that when you're using your devices from now on. We also can show damage to the testis, and this is work, again, done with colleagues both in Turkey and Brazil, and you can see the testicular cells are having loss of borders there when exposed to cell phone radiation. And what I want to tell you is that the Cleveland Clinic has been warning its patients for years to keep phones out of their pockets if they want to have healthy babies. The same advice comes from the Mayo Clinic. And the reason is there's a recognition that cell phone radiation can damage testicular function. The highest exposure you can see in this image there goes into the penis and the testis, and there may be a role as well for erectile dysfunction. That's a matter that's being studied right now at both those institutions. So where are we? Here's a news flash from California from yesterday. It says, poor cell phone reception. Weak bars, don't use your phone. It can give you 10,000 times more exposure than when you have a strong signal. And be aware of that, but also be aware that this advice about how to use phones safely has been issued by the California Department of Public Health, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, the government of France, the government of Israel, and a number of other groups that all say keep the phone off the body, put it on airplane mode, avoid using it when signals are weak.
So all of the research in that talk, she doesn't go into the specific citations, but if you go to Environmental Health Trust, we have just actually a small sample of the hundreds and hundreds of studies that have been done that do show biological effects. So these are effects that are found at levels which are below, at levels which are legal. They're still compliant with our government's laws. So let's fast track to 5G. 5G is going to, and there's been published studies on this, because there are going to be more cell towers placed in front of homes, in neighborhoods, like hundreds in some cities, there will be an increase in the overall level of environmental radiation. So there are appeals, this is all on our website as well, by scientists calling to halt 5G. And what I'm going to show you now is actually a clip from Canada, where a group of scientists, as well as Frank Clegg, he's former Microsoft Canada president, he's there on the side in the box, are calling to halt 5G. And they explain also why. And in this particular clip, you'll see Dr. Anthony Miller, who has co-published along with Dr. Davis research which has reviewed the research on cancer and concludes that radio frequency radiation, which is cell tower, cell phone, wireless radiation, is a human carcinogen.
5G fifth generation technology promises faster download speeds and conveniences that most of us have never dreamed of, but will also be blanketed with a new type of radiation called millimeter waves. Health experts are warning about the rising risks with a 5G rollout.
It's not been made clear to the public that 5G won't just be another number and letter on your cell phone. It requires an entirely new infrastructure of thousands of small cellular antennas to be erected throughout cities where it's going to be installed.
What would 5G infrastructure look like? Small cell antennas could be placed as close as every third hydro pole. Scientists from 42 countries are now warning their governments about the emerging health problems associated with wireless radiation, and Canadian doctors and scientists have added their voices.
The most prevalent symptoms include headache, fatigue, decreased ability to concentrate, tinnitus, irritability, and insomnia. Impacts on The heart and the nervous system are also of great concern.
Dr. Magda Havas is internationally recognized for her research on the biological effects of electromagnetic pollution. She said that at high intensities, these waves cause intense heat and pain because sweat glands on the surface of our skin act like mini antennas.
At lower frequencies, scientists are predicting damage to eyes, loss of insect populations which are already declining, antibiotic resistance in bacteria, and physiological effects on the nervous system and on the immune system.
One advisor to the World Health Organization said there's enough evidence that if they were to re-evaluate radiofrequency radiation,
it would be placed in class 1, i.e. a human carcinogen, and governments could not possibly ignore that.
So some people might be asking, well, wait, what? Why aren't I hearing this? Why, when I go to the Food and Drug Administration or to the CDC, does it not say any of this information? Hopefully I'll explain that in a bit. But I want to point out that most recently, the National Toxicology Program, which is the gold standard of animal testing programs really worldwide, certainly in the United States. It's our federal government's testing program for agents. Did a study, it's a $30 million study. It was started, nominated in 1999 by the Food and Drug Administration to find out what the long-term effects of radiofrequency radiation might be by using an animal model, which is of course different than a human model. And what they found after exposing rats and mice to cell phone radiation for 2 years was in the male rats, clear evidence of tumors in the hearts, tumors in the brains, malignant gliomas, and also in the adrenal glands of male rats as well, what's classified as some evidence. They also found, they took a subsection of the mice and rats and they checked them for DNA damage and they sacrificed them at 14 and 19 weeks. So this wasn't waiting until later in the study. And they found DNA damage in the frontal cortex of the brain in male mice, the blood cells of the female mice, and the hippocampus of male rats. Now, what's important about this study is that the levels of exposure were very carefully controlled. The animals were in underground bunkers, and they really wanted to make sure that the exposure was something that wouldn't cause overheating, because the way our federal government has our regulations on what's allowable and what's not is actually based on heating. The assumption is that if radio frequency, just like microwaves, overheats, obviously that's bad, that's not good. So everything is set in terms of communication so it doesn't overheat. These animals were not heated to a level that should have caused any harm. Yet these effects were found, and there were actually other findings of statistical significance in various of the exposed groups, but these were the final results in terms of what they concluded in terms of cancer and DNA damage. Now, if you go to the National Toxicology Program website, the scientists, the research findings are reviewed, and they also say in the FAQs that they themselves reduce radiofrequency radiation from cell phones. However, when this study came out, the Food and Drug Administration that nominated this study to happen now states that they reject the findings. And if you go online and search on this, you'll actually find a lot of critiques of the study that downplay it. Dr. Ronald Melnick is one of the scientists who, this is a clip I'm going to play in a minute, who led the design of the study. He's a 28-year NIH scientist. He is now one of our scientific advisors. And he's retired for a few years, and he's been giving talks about the study, stating that the FDA should actually explain themselves more, because the critiques that are being put forth by the FDA, what he says, are not actually valid criticisms of the study, and that what the FDA needs to do is do an assessment to determine what this means for humans, because what this study does is show that the assumption that non-ionizing radiation cannot harm us is erroneous. And I'm going to play a brief clip. If you want to go online and you're more interested in this, you can watch Dr. Melnick present the findings, explain them technically, and this is just a clip at the end of a talk where he describes what the study found and what his conclusions are.
What does the public need to know? There have been multiple studies have found increases in cancer associated with exposure to radio frequency radiation. This is animals and humans. Because of the widespread use of cell phones, even a small increase in cancer risk would have a serious public health impact. I strongly feel precautionary principles should be promoted by health and regulatory agencies, especially for children and pregnant women. The agencies in the US say, if you are concerned, that puts the burden on the individual. It doesn't say, we are concerned. It should be very straightforward. Precautionary principles should be promoted because, as mentioned earlier, risk can be greater for children than adults due to the increased penetration of the radiation within brains of children, and the developing nervous system is more susceptible to tissue damaging agents. So finally, what is the lesson that should be learned? When dealing with assumptions, I think we've shown that assumptions in this case can be wrong, so that we should no longer assume that any current or future wireless technology, including 5G, is safe without adequate testing.
Before I move on to a different aspect of 5G, one of the concerns that is repeatedly brought up is the vulnerability of children. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has written repeated letters to our federal government calling for a review of the limits that we have, and talked about how the research, of which there are several published studies, have found that children absorb this radiation deeper into their brain, with peak levels that are much higher in certain brain centers which are responsible for memory and learning. But cancer is actually only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the research has found. In addition to DNA damage, there's memory and brain damage. There was a study that was published, which is a replicated study looking at teenagers, and found that after 1 year, those adolescents, this was in hundreds of Swiss adolescents, who had the phone to their head that with the highest amount of use, hours of use, had an impact to memory on a study that was designed to test the very area that had the highest exposure from the phone. Then there are sperm and reproduction damage, which has been found in many studies, synergistic effects, which I think are really important, because when there's been studies that have looked at an electromagnetic fields as well as a toxic agent, they've found a tumor promotion effect, so that the end amount of cancers is more with the combination of exposures. Oxidative stress, then there's also impacts to bees and insects, which I'm going to briefly talk about, as well as trees, the environment. There's actually quite a long list. Now, with 5G, they're going to use, this network is going to use not only the frequencies that we have now, and in fact, it's going to be using the current kind of frequencies we have now, but in a different modulation, a different way that they use the frequencies. But they're also going to be using millimeter waves. These are higher frequencies, and there are not many studies that have investigated how will these waves impact birds and bees and trees. And here's a study, it's actually the first, it's one of two that I'm aware of that looked at millimeter waves specifically. And what this study did was just computer modeling of insects to see how the radiation, the intensity was absorbed into the insects. They looked at 5 insects. This is the honeybee, the western honeybee. This is from the study, and what they found that is as the frequency went higher to where the frequency sort of matched the size of the insect, that then there was a much higher absorption into into the insect. And the researchers conclude this could lead to changes in insect behavior, physiology, and morphology over time due to an increase in body temperatures from the dielectric heating. Now, I've been talking about non-heating effects before. Now I'm talking about potential for heating, but what I want to point out is that first, how could we not have already researched this, being that birds and bees are going to be flying around? They're not going to be on the ground. So if you're going to have 1 million new antennas just in the United States alone, which is what's being projected, what are we talking about here? And why has there been no environmental review done? We are advocating for a full environmental review that has done adequate evaluation of effects to birds, bees, and trees. Dr. Leonard Hardell is a scientist. He's an oncologist, MD, who did studies on Agent Orange and DDT years ago. There were attempts to discredit him years ago, and he's now one of the leading scientists working on cell phone radiation. He's an epidemiologist. He's well published. You can look up all of the research that he's done. He also is a World Health Organization advisor. And I have a quote from him about one of his studies where he's looked at the research and concludes that it is a human carcinogen. Now, what I want to play for you is something that might have come up in your thinking about, well, why aren't we doing anything about this? Why aren't I hearing about this? When I go to different authorities, it seems to be saying that this is safe. I have a clip of him talking about how the authorities that we would go to or expect would give us a safety limit. What happens is in the world, there are certain authorities that are looked at, and then different governments will take their recommended limits and use them as theirs. And what he's published on repeatedly, actually, is how these authorities are actually a small group of scientists who are often in many of the same organizations. And he's published on their conflict of interest. And here he is at the end of a talk talking about the World Health Organization. There are two groups in the World Health Organization. One started by industry, the WHO EMF project. The other is independent. They're vetted for independence and conflicts. That's the International Agency for the Research on Cancer. But the WHO EMF project is often put forward as showing proof of safety.
I would end with this picture showing, I was interviewed by a Swedish journalist a couple of weeks ago, and she said all the time, like a mantra, that the majority of researchers say that this is safe. There is no risk whatsoever with anything with the radio frequency. She had interviewed before me a Swedish prominent person, Maria Feisting. But what you can think of is that this is a majority. It's not the majority. They are quite few. The majority have, for example, signed the EMF Science Appeal, which is almost 250 scientists that have signed it, and all with their own research in this area, like Martin Paul and others. These persons are sitting in different organizations, as you can see here, within WHO group, expert group, within ICNIRP, without United States AGNIR, without the Swedish Radiation Protection Agency, and the SKINIR. And the problem is here that you will get repetition of what is said, because, for example, Maria Feistings, she says that she's not here to defend, but she has heard this from me before, so she knows it. She can say, but look here, ICNIRP came to the same conclusion, and look here in United Kingdom, AGNIR, and the Swedish Radiation Protection Agency, they came to the same conclusion. The problem is that it's the same persons. If you in ICNIRP come to one conclusion, you are not expected to go to another organization and come to a different conclusion. So this is a very dangerous situation, because like SSM in Sweden, they are not allowing any critical person. All the persons who are sitting there are those yes or no sayers. I mean, they say no, there is no not any risk. And they make their assessment yearly, updating what evidence has come. They do not make an overview of several years, for example.
So just to give you a flavor of what's happening around the world, in the United States, the New Hampshire House passed a bill that was enacted establishing a commission to study the environmental and human health effects of 5G. And they actually ask a question, which is why have thousands of peer-reviewed studies, including the NTP, shown impacts, and why isn't anything happening? And they have a whole list of questions that they're set to evaluate. They've been meeting every month. With COVID. It's moving to Zoom, of course. But you can go online on our website. We link to where you can read all the minutes and the research that they've evaluated. And the question that I hope some people have is, why are states doing this? Why isn't our federal government doing this? This should have been done before there was a rollout. It's certainly my opinion. Now, how did we get in this situation? Well, Harvard Center for Ethics published a report in 2015 about how the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is a captured agency where there's a revolving door between industry and government, and they are the regulators. And just recently, they have concluded that there's no reason to do a full scientific review of our limits. And in fact, they are now taking new frequencies and making laws about how much we're allowed to be exposed to based on an assumption that wireless is safe. They are ignoring. There are thousands of submissions and many scientists who've written them telling them that wireless and the 5G is not safe, but they are so far ignoring that and stating that the FDA says there's no problem, even though the FDA has not done a full scientific review of all the research. So just to look at the industry, the revolving door between industry and government, we now have Ajit Pai, who's former counsel for Wiley Ryan, who worked for Verizon. Wiley Ryan is the law firm of the wireless industry. Before him, as chair, was Tom Wheeler, who was the former head of the wireless industry, a lobbyist. And he was appointed and actually put 5G into motion by putting forward all of these regulations which streamline 5G and stop local authorities from having a say about where small cells and cell antennas can be placed. Brendan Carr is an FCC commissioner, also a former lawyer for Wiley and Ryan. He also was a lawyer who, when he was working for industry, helped to sue the city of San Francisco for the Cell Phone Right to Know Act. And then we have Meredith Atwell-Baker, who's now the head of the wireless industry, who used to be FCC commissioner, Michael Powell, also former FCC commissioner, now president of the NCTA, and Jonathan Adelstein, who's now president of the PCIA wireless infrastructure, former FCC commissioner. And actually, it goes on, and there's the Harvard report is an excellent review of the issue. The backstory is that it was going to be that the EPA was going to do a full evaluation and set federally developed safety limits based on biological impacts, and they were defunded. At the same time that there was the most lobbying ever from wireless companies for the Telecom Act, and then the FCC adopted limits based on industry-dominated groups. And way back when, decades ago, there was research showing DNA damage, and I'm talking about the Motorola Wargame memo, because when this research first came out a long time ago in the 90s, there was a memo that was leaked where it was between Motorola and the public relations firm, where they talk about wargaming the issue. They were wargaming the Lai Singh issue. And Lai and Singh were two scientists who had found DNA damage from wireless radiation. And wargaming is the creation of doubt, which is how we are where we are. So what is happening moving forward? Many cities, especially in California, are enacting laws to prohibit the installation of or to limit and restrict or have certain laws around putting up these small cells in towns. Keene, New Hampshire and Santa Barbara have halted 5G. It's a temporary halt right now. There are many local councils where people are organizing on this and raising it with their officials. In Italy, I need to update the slide. Actually, there are 500, that's right, 500 municipalities that have signed, where the elected officials have signed resolutions calling to halt 5G. In France, they are doing scientific reviews of what the research says. They did an interim report that already talks about how there is a lack of data to even use to understand what the full impact will be. And there's many cities that have used to be test cities, and now, like in Kalamata was a test city for 5G in Greece, and they have terminated that contract. And in several countries are actually putting a halt, having an expert committee review the issue to then make a decision. One of the problems is that expert committee in some of these countries, I'm not going to go into it here, but they're actually made up of industry, or they're coming up with conclusions like, well, there's no proof of harm, because of course, to know if 5G is established, that would mean having the people exposed for a long time. And so then they are moving forward. Switzerland did this and said, look, we are not going to change our allowable limits to accommodate 5G. And I'm showing you now as a slide showing when it comes to cell towers, we have an allowable limit in the United States, Japan, Australia, and actually several other countries, much higher than other countries like Russia, Israel, China, Turkey, Bulgaria, and it's actually a full list on our website. And in the countries that don't allow as much of this radiation, industry is saying that they have to increase the levels to accommodate 5G, because there's going to, of course, be more densely situated. I think my other videos somehow are not showing up. I had 2 other videos I wanted to show you, but then there's the issue of birds. And I'm going to briefly point out that the former U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service scientist, biologist, Albert Manville, who's now retired, has been writing letters, writing to our federal government, warning about the impact to birds. You can go online and read his letters. And what he always points out is that there have been effects found at levels far, far lower than FCC limits. And this is just a quote, and when he talks about in field studies of wild birds in Spain, there have found strong negative correlations between levels of tower-emitted microwave radiation in bird breeding, nesting, roosting, and survival in the vicinity of electromagnetic fields. And he actually has several chapters. We have these up on our website where he talks about different birds, different impacts, the different studies. This is something that our federal government should be addressing before the rollout. In India, when they looked at this issue, they put together an entire report of all the research, and they concluded that they needed to drop their limits to be more protective. And they actually dropped them to 1/10 of what they were before, after doing a review with several ministries of the impacts to birds and bees. So on our website, we have research showing impacts to bees, such as reduced motor activity. This is from the wireless frequencies in use now. Biochemical changes, inducing the worker piping signal, decline in colony strength. Other issues, which do not have to do with the radiation, there's actually plenty of non-radio frequency radiation concerns. Actually, I won't use the word concerns. I'll say issues posed, because this is more than a concern. This is documented science, and we have all of this on our website. But that is the energy consumption of 5G and the Internet of Things. You'll often hear, and I'm often told in meetings by industry, that look, a small cell uses a lot less power. But what that is a half-truth. It's misinformation, because there's going to be millions of new small cells. Not only that, but we're still going to be using those macro towers. So we are adding in things that use energy. On top of it, there's going to be billions of new devices that are going to be connecting. Now, there are many research papers published about this, about how it's going to increase our overall energy use, even if there are energy efficiency gains. They're not going to be able to catch up with the mere fact that there are so many devices. And what I'm showing you is images from a report by the Shift Project, which is a carbon transition think tank. And they just issued a report called Lean ICT Towards Digital Sobriety. It's a report on the environmental impact of information technologies. And they talk about the projected energy use and how the answer is what they call digital sobriety, because there's going to be such an increase in growth. The digital transition, I'm going to quote them, as it is currently implemented, participates to global warming more than it helps preventing it. The need for action is therefore urgent. There's also research on impacts to trees, which is on our website. This is from a field study that looked at antennas and damage to trees. I'm not going to go into details, but here's one of many pictures. They looked at dozens of trees over 9 years and found damage to trees where there was higher radiation from a nearby antenna. And just to show you a little bit about what's happening that's not in the media, this is Amsterdam. There's protests happening all over. Australia, California, which there have been many actions, Belgium, these are from before COVID, South Africa, Italy, New South Wales, Australia, New Zealand, Greece, Cyprus, Spain, Isle of Wight, England. And this is not a conspiracy theory. There are things that are being said that are absolutely over the top, which I don't agree with many scientists don't agree with, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what the scientific body of research shows. This is a slide I like to point to, which is that radio frequency is not the only harm here. The pollution, the abuse, and the environmental destruction are really at every stage of the life cycle of the device, of that phone that you have in your hand. When you think about what minerals made the phone, who touched those minerals to get those raw minerals? There are conflict minerals and war that's being waged with the money from that, inhumane working conditions at every level, the putting together of the parts in here, the conditions of the workers in the factories. I have a picture here from the Foxconn that makes parts for Apple. Those are the suicide nets that were put up because so many people were throwing themselves out of the windows. Toxins in manufacturing. If you're interested in a movie to watch, I recommend Complicit, which is about all of these young workers who are getting leukemia from the benzene, and you have to wash different mechanical parts to the phone, and they are getting sick, but they don't have insurance, and they're suing the companies to be able to get healthcare coverage. And then they're also committing suicide too, because they don't want their families to have to go into debt to pay for their cancer treatment. Then, of course, there's the radiation exposure, and then the e-waste. It's not just about e-waste, which is its own huge issue, but also the repolluting of communities. We take all your devices when you're done with them, we throw them away, we get a new one. Where do they go? Actually, they go to many different countries where children and families are by hand separating out the pieces, being poisoned by the toxins that are in them, burning power cords to get the copper, inhaling the smoke. I could go on, but what is needed is a full review of this entire issue. We don't have much time except to say, go on our website. You can learn more about different policies that are being put forward internationally related to cell phone radiation, like Wi-Fi being removed from elementary schools, countries that have banned Belgium, France, French Polynesia. They explain that you should reduce exposure. And many, they don't say anything's proven necessarily. It's all different depending on the country. But they say that because we don't have that data on long-term use and because children can be more vulnerable, et cetera. Whereas we in the United States are not provided that.
Τα παιδιά μας εκτίθενται καθημερινά σε ένα ηλεκτρονικό νέφος, το οποίο δημιουργείται από την ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi και άλλα παρόμοια. Η ακτινοβολία αυτή, σύμφωνα με τον Παγκόσμιο Οργανισμό Υγείας, είναι πιθανώς καρκινογόνα για τον άνθρωπο. Σύμφωνα με νεότερες έρευνες, η ακτινοβολία αυτή είναι πιθανό να προκαλέσει και άλλες σοβαρές επιδράσεις στην ανάπτυξη και λειτουργία του εγκεφάλου, του αναπαραγωγικού και άλλων συστημάτων του εμβρίου και του παιδιού, να προκαλέσει καταστροφή των νευρικών κυττάρων και του DNA, διάσπαση της προσοχής, διαταραχές στη μάθηση και άλλες νευρολογικές παθήσεις. Τα παιδιά είναι πολύ ευάλωτα. Μπορούμε όμως σε σημαντικό βαθμό να τα προφυλάξουμε από ένα σοβαρό κίνδυνο. Φτάνει να μάθουμε πώς.
Αφού μας αγαπάτε, γιατί μας ακτινοβολείτε με τα Wi-Fi και τα κινητά σας τηλέφωνα? Έχουμε δικαίωμα στην υγεία και πρώτοι εσείς μπορείτε και πρέπει να μας προφυλάξετε.
Στη βάση της αρχής της προφύλαξης, το Συμβούλιο της Ευρώπης, το Ευρωκοινοβούλιο, επιστήμονες, ιατρικοί και εκπαιδευτικοί σύλλογοι στην Ευρώπη συμβουλεύουν ότι θα πρέπει να μειωθεί η έκθεση των παιδιών στην ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi, ιδίως στο σπίτι και στο σχολείο.
Η έκθεση των παιδιών σε ηλεκτρονικό νέφος εγκυμονεί κινδύνους. Η χρήση των κινητών και συσκευών Wi-Fi από παιδιά μικρότερα των 14 ετών πρέπει να αποφεύγεται. Προφυλάξτε την υγεία και το μέλλον των παιδιών σας. Το ίδιο ισχύει και για την έγκυο. Οι έφηβοι ποτέ δεν βάζουν το κινητό στο υπνοδωμάτιο τους, στις τσέπες τους, στα μπράτσα ή κοντά στο στήθος τους. Πάντα χρησιμοποιούν hands-free και κρατούν το κινητό μακριά από το σώμα τους.
Αξιοποιώ την τεχνολογία σωστά. Γνωρίζω τους κινδύνους και δεν εξαρτώμαι από αυτή. Χρησιμοποιώ ενσύρματη σύνδεση για τον υπολογιστή του σπιτιού μου και ενεργοποιώ το Wi-Fi και τα δεδομένα κινητής τηλεφωνίας μόνο όταν χρειάζεται και ποτέ όταν τα παιδιά μου είναι κοντά. Δεν χρησιμοποιώ κινητό τηλέφωνο στο αυτοκίνητο όταν τα παιδιά μου βρίσκονται σε αυτό. Η έκθεση στην ακτινοβολία είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερη. Προστατεύω πάντα τα παιδιά μου.
Η Γαλλία ήδη με νόμο απαγόρευσε τη χρήση Wi-Fi σε παιδικούς σταθμούς και σε χώρους όπου φιλοξενούνται παιδιά κάτω των 3 χρόνων. Επιτρέπει ελάχιστη χρήση στα σχολεία κάτω από αυστηρούς περιορισμούς.
Στον υπηαγωγείο, στο σχολείο και στο σπίτι περνάμε τουλάχιστον το 75% του χρόνου μας.
Απαιτούν μια ασφάλεια χωρίς ακτινοβολίες από Wi-Fi, κινητά και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις. Η υγεία είναι δικαίωμα. Μην μας το στερείτε.
Δεν έχουμε το δικαίωμα να ρισκάρουμε την υγεία των παιδιών μας αναμένοντας παθητικά τους άλλους να κάνουν κάτι. Ας ξεχάσουμε τι είναι βολικό για μας και ας τους χαρίσουμε το καλύτερο δώρο, την υγεία τους, μετατρέποντας το σπίτι και το σχολείο σε όαση προστασίας.
Το σπίτι μου είναι όαση αγάπης και ασφάλειας. Σβήνω τα Wi-Fi και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις όταν δεν χρησιμοποιούνται και κυρίως όταν τα παιδιά είναι στο σπίτι και τα κλείνω πάντοτε το βράδυ. Αξιοποιώ το κουμπάκι on-off. Είναι τόσο απλό να μειώσω το χρόνο αχρίαστης έκθεσης. Επενδύω στην υγεία των παιδιών μου μακροχρόνια.
Η ζωή και το μέλλον τους είναι στα δικά μας χέρια.
Δώστε στα παιδιά ένα μοναδικό δώρο ζωής.
Την υγεία τους.
India, where there's so much awareness being raised on this, actually, this is the Barisha Club's art installation. I believe art is always the answer to everything, actually, because we have the science on this. Now we just need the art to raise awareness. But this is a large-scale installation created over weeks and weeks with many people to showcase the impact to birds from cell tower radiation. So you walk inside of it. They have a little bird in front of every little mini antenna here. And here they are receiving one of the awards for their work. A lot that is happening all around the world and in the United States. And I think the first thing to do is to get educated on this and with local people, your neighbors, your friends, your family, and to take the time to actually look at the whole story so that you can make a decision for yourself. There are a lot of critiques of a lot of what I shared, for example. You might go online and think, well, wait, it says this, but take the time to look at each piece, because industry has done what the tobacco industry has done. They fund science, they design studies, and they have messengers of that are purported to be experts. So once you have made a decision to do something about it, talking to your elected officials is extremely important. Letting them know that this is an issue that you care about. Talking to gatekeepers in your community about what they can do. Now, what we ultimately want in terms of what is the end game, I know for us, is to have the Environmental Protection Agency or a federal agency do a full independent review of the independent literature and to do research to assess the human health and environmental impacts before rolling out 5G. So there are many groups working on this. Certainly sign up for an Environmental Health Trust. We present the science and have a lot of information for you. There's Americans for Responsible Technology. There's also a group called Physicians for Safe Technology, as well as another resource. But beginning to get educated on this so that you can, call for, a lot of communities are asking for in their community, local protections to have the most authority and you can have. Like, so for example, so that a company can't just come and put a cell tower up, but they didn't inform you, they didn't tell you, they didn't look for an alternative place, so that you can retain as much authority as you have in the law. And then we need to start changing policy. So it's kind of a local, there's also state issues, and at the federal level, all of our federal elected officials need to be made aware of this issue. And they'll often say, my hands are tied. But their hands are not tied. There's a lot that can happen. So we have resources on our website for that, as well as recommended videos. So first, I want to say, please go to our website and look up. I have a lot of details on how to reduce cell phone radiation. I'll talk about a few examples now. So learning a couple things about your phone is important. The closer to your body, the more exposure, the more it's going to be absorbed into your body. So you want to keep a distance. That's the first thing to know. Using your phone on speakerphone, with it, hopefully like on a table at a bit of a distance is the best thing to do. Not to have it pressed up against your head, not to have it in your bra, in your spandex pants when you go running. Because if you want to use it to listen to a podcast or music and other things, learn how to turn it on airplane mode. So airplane mode is really important, where you turn it on airplane mode, then, because it used to be airplane mode was just enough, but now you actually want to make sure location's off, Bluetooth is off, any other Wi-Fi or antennas are off. Then it is not transmitting at least the majority of the transmissions. There's discussion about whether there are hidden antennas that I hear about at times, but I'm not, that's why apparently the president doesn't have a cell phone all the time in certain places. But if you do those things, you're going to get the wireless antennas off. If you're in the car and you want to listen to music, or you're hanging out with your friends, have your music pre-downloaded. There's ways that you can have, what is it called? It starts with an S that people listen to music with. Spotify. You can download music, have it pre-downloaded. Or if you want to watch a movie, have it pre-downloaded on your computer. Don't be streaming wirelessly. Now, in terms of for men, well, I'd like to say there was an easy answer. I mean, turn it off, completely off, and put it in your pocket. Now, if you're waiting for something, we got to come up, bring the bag back and have it in a bag. Now, I preface that to say we don't have a known safe level of radiation. So turning it off as much as possible is really important. I'm especially concerned about situations where you're in areas of low service, like a basement, like an interior room in a dorm or something like that, because the radiation can be higher from the phone. Now, of course, when you have in an area of high service, you're having more from the cell towers. So the answer is actually to move to safe technology. The only way we're going to get safe technology is if we have policy change. This is where the personal is the political. You asked, what do men do? This person asked, what do men do about the phone? And I obviously don't have like the best answer that everyone wants to hear. I wish there were a magic bullet. There's not. The answer is policy change. We should be able to buy what looks like a phone and acts like a phone, but that can plug in through a wire wherever we go to connect so that we can have connections. I'm not saying no technology. I use technology all the time, but we need to develop safe technology whenever possible, like in your home, your living space, your workspace, and address occupational issues too, like people at work. There are people whose jobs depend on phones. And just to give you like a little bit of history, in California, a decade ago, and Dr. Davis actually presented there, and her recommendations along with Dr. Herberman were put forward by the California Department of Health in a long document that never saw the light of day till just a few years ago, because Dr. Moskowitz at UC Berkeley, you can look up Dr. Joel Moskowitz to learn more about his work, had to do a court order to dig up this report, which was saying that for the workers of California, that they needed to start to reduce exposure. They had recommendations on how to do it, and they talked about buying safer equipment even and promoting wired phones. But that was all buried.
California officials say the warning about keeping a cell phone pressed up against your ear was issued largely because radio frequency emissions could be damaging, particularly to children.
Now, children on average are starting at the age of 10 and using cell phones for a lot of activities.
California's Department of Public Health recommends using the speakerphone or headphones, sleeping at least an arm's length away from it, and avoiding keeping it in your pocket. The move comes after a 3-year-long legal battle by Joel Moskowitz, who forced the state to release a long secret study of cell phone risk. Certainly there are those who say this is going to cause panic.
People are not going to give up these devices. That's not what we're seeking. What we're seeking is that people take the appropriate cautions and reduce their risk substantially.
California's warning says that while the science is still evolving, some studies suggest a link between high cell phone use and brain cancer, lower sperm count, and headaches.
This is just like the history of tobacco.
Now, unlike cigarettes, cell phones are actually useful for something.
Professor Stan Glantz uncovered long secret tobacco company research that revealed the dangers of smoking. He's watching the science on cell phones.
The case is by no means closed yet, but there's certainly enough evidence to be concerned, to the point that I don't usually carry a cell phone.
California is not alone in this warning. The Food and Drug Administration says on its website the risk is probably very small, but suggests using speaker mode or a headset. And Apple includes a warning of sorts on all iPhones, but it's not easy to find. You have to go to Settings, General, About, down to the bottom here to Legal, then to RF Exposure, where finally Apple suggests using headphones or the speakerphone to reduce exposure to radio frequency emissions.
There are a lot of issues here, but it's no different than any other environmental health issue that we've had. Actually, it's just, at first it seems like it's not possible, and actually it is to address this. And right now, I think we're at a tipping point. Well, I don't speak specifically to different products, and there is an issue with all of the products that we have. And that is that because the federal government is not acknowledging that this is an issue, we don't have adequate procedures to evaluate these products. So really, we need the government to start to address this issue so that we can look at these products and really begin to rate them. Are they effective? Are they doing what they say they should do? So this is a real issue. Now, let me say that if you have a shielding silver fabric, it can shield, but what other things might be happening that we're not aware of? So for example, some people take material and they put it up in their room to block something from coming from the outside. But you might have an antenna you don't know about that's coming from the other side that goes this way, bounces off of that shield you have up on your wall, and actually creates more exposure for yourself. So similarly, when we start dealing with shields on phones, like things that go on the back of phones, my concern is that, and this is on airplane mode, my concern is that there can be, you could leave that, like, especially kids, sometimes parents get these for their kids. Kids are not going to make sure little, 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, I actually know the story of someone who bought it for their child. They might hold it in a way that puts more radiation on themselves and not turn it the way so that it's deflecting off. What about the person on the other side? There's all these issues, all of which can be addressed if we had safer policy, if we had devices that did everything a phone did but could be hardwired, which is what is my dream, and I believe and hope will happen in my lifetime. And also, the companies really need to put it on them. They need to come up and prove safety. So there's a lot of this. Oh, let me ask one more thing. I'm sure a lot of people on the call use the phone as their alarm clock. Just get a battery-powered alarm clock. Do I have any example here? No, right here. But battery-powered alarm clock, or put your phone in airplane mode, it'll still do the alarm clock. And a lot of people find that when they reduce their exposure, they get better sleep, and they actually feel better having breaks from their phone. Oh, turn off notifications, because every time it's beeping, your app, if you have more apps running, those apps will be connecting to the tower, and that creates more exposure. Also, sadly, videos and pictures use a lot more power to communicate, so that's higher radiation exposure for you. Definitely don't text or scroll or do things with your phone on your abdomen or at night. Some people sleep with the phone on their chest. This is not recommended because of the exposure to your body. Get a hardwired computer set up. Many dorms, I don't know about Duke, I don't know about the specific, but if there's a way to get to plug in your computer, it's not as hard as it seems. You can get a, if I can show you this. This is my computer is using this right now. It's an adapter for my Mac. So I'm plugged into an Ethernet. It's faster, so fast to use wired internet whenever possible. Some places still have that. So there are a lot of recommendations we have on our website for that. Yes, if you, and I have it in the chat, I hope it's showing, we have research on cancer and cell phones, research that looks at 5G frequencies and millimeter waves, research on the synergistic effects, research on brain. We have all of that on our website on ehtrust.org. The European Union has a different framework for decision making, and the precautionary policy is actually part of the way they make decisions, whereas it's not a part of our law, of our legal framework in the United States. So when we talk to people, I actually just had a phone call with a journalist out of Europe who said to me, is it true that you don't follow the precautionary policy in the United States? Is that really true? I mean, this is what we do here. This is how we make our decisions. Like they've banned different food additives and food dyes in Europe, whereas here we have the same product, but with agents that have been known to cause, you know, red food dye and so on. Actually, I think we just finally got rid of them. The FDA got rid of a few of them just last year, but it takes forever. So we don't have that framework. And what a lot of the scientists would say now is it's no longer about actually precautionary principle. We know that there are biological effects. Even the scientists who say there's no proof of harm, as they say now, it's not proven to be established. The health effects are not established. That's what you'll often hear. It's not proven, it's not established. But they will, if you say, well, are biological effects proven? Then we get into a different conversation. What they say is the biological effects are not proven. The question I had when I got into this was, well, who proves? Who establishes? Who's the expert groups that make that decision? That seems to be the important question, is are they looking at everything and coming to a decision based on a systematic review of the science? That's what I would expect. Lo and behold, to find out that those groups are private, invite-only groups, of which they're like worldwide, there are a few groups, and they often have the same people in them. I was in a meeting with some particular person who is in one of those groups, who was defending a cell tower installation and said, well, look at this institution, look at Health Canada, they're saying this. And I looked at him and I said, but you were in that group. I mean, everyone is in, they're the same handful of scientists are in many of these groups. And there's a particular group called ICNIRP, the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. That sounds very fancy, very important. But that's actually a group of 13 commissioners. They invite in who they choose. And it's not like it's open where people are vetted in a transparent and open way. That's not happening. And a lot of those people are in a lot of the groups around the world that are making decisions. And a lot of governments don't have the capacity or the scientists available to like look at everything and make a decision. So they look to ICNIRP to give them limits, saying, well, that's the international authority. However, Russia and China are two countries that actually would say, we have science-based limits that are based on science that we have done. And they have a limit that's 100 times, much less than ICNIRP. Now, those limits are not necessarily safe. Scientists would say that does not mean safety, but it just shows you how there are the decision-making groups, like who's a part of the decision-making groups is really important.